Hey everybody, welcome to Moment of Clarity. Thanks for joining me today. I have another incredible guest for you, which we'll get to in 1 minute. Also, I am streaming. I'm on youtube.com/Moment of Clarity and rockfin.com/Lee Camp. If anybody donates on the super chat, all those donations go to people in need, our little solidarity fund. If you are someone struggling right now, you can email commoncensored@protonmail.com and we'll try and help you out a little. But yeah, take a second to share this, let people know. I really appreciate you guys joining me today. Today is truly an incredible guest. I mean, it's been a big couple weeks. As I mentioned last week, I apparently am only having vice presidential and presidential candidates on the show nowadays. I had Eugene per year. I had David Cobb, and now former vice presidential candidate Ajamu Baraka. Also, an excellent writer and political activist and a spokesperson for Black Alliance for Peace. So please welcome him with me. Hello.
Hey, Lee. Good to be here. Always good to be with you.
It's a pleasure to speak to you again. It's been too long now that we can't travel anymore, it seems. But
right.
So I wanted to start off by talking about what's been going on with the police brutality in America, the Derek Chauvin trial, which, you know, our mainstream media will talk about how police brutality is a thing. They'll talk about how Derek Chauvin should not have killed George Floyd, but they won't really get to the heart of the matter, which I think is what I've seen you doing so well with your writing recently.
Well, they won't, and they can't, because the heart of the matter is the relationship, the colonial relationship between the state and the black and brown populations of the U.S. So for them to really go to that question is to raise the legitimacy of the U.S. state and to raise some questions around that relationship that they're just not prepared to raise. So we have to raise it. We have to remind people that this whole call for something called justice is a phony call. It's not something that can't really be achieved. Sure, you can have situations from time to time where someone gets charged with these heinous crimes, but in terms of those crimes stopping, that relationship being altered between the state and the black working class and other colonized people, it's not going to happen because it is structured within the DNA of this settler colonial project. So, you know, they can only go so far.
Yeah. And also, and I think this obviously is a lot of what you're talking about as well, but the policing in America is set up in such a way that it is to continue a legacy of white supremacy, to continue and solidify and protect the class structure. And so in this trial with Derek Chauvin, you could see him found guilty or not guilty, let's hope guilty, but and it won't actually do anything to change policing in America.
Well, I just, a piece I wrote just came out today, and Black Agenda Report, and I think also in Counterpunch and Dissident Voice, where I talk about this show trial. And I talk about the fact that this was in fact a setup, that it became quite clear to many of us that Chauvin had to be the sacrificial lamb, that the state couldn't get around what millions of people saw with their own eyes around the world. And so it was set up where this was supposed to be a referendum on U.S. justice, the ability of the state to be able to render justice. And we saw something that was quite extraordinary with police officials breaking ranks, breaking tradition, and providing damaging testimony against one of their own. But it was quite clear. It wasn't, I'm not going to suggest a conspiracy between state propagandists and police forces in Minneapolis. But there was a sort of an ideological conformity here, something that suggested to all the authorities that they could not defend this particular police person, and that there was in fact would be some value in this person being convicted. So the show trial was set up, but one thing happened that kind of disrupted their plan, and that is another killing of an unarmed black kid, Deontay Wright, and that threw into a panic, how they're going to frame this, because it's quite clear that these cases are not going to stop. So when people call for justice, what are they calling for now? A trial? Is that all that we can call for? So this is this is a continuation. It will continue as long as there's not an alteration in that relationship, as long as the police forces continue to do what they've been set up to do, to control and to contain the working class and the black and brown colonial peoples.
Yeah. I think you're right that it's kind of thrown the couching, the framing of the story into disarray, as they were hoping it would be, that they could just nail down this one bad apple, and act like that was going to change things. I also saw you tweeting about the connection between what we see with police brutality in America and our military overseas, our attacks, our invasions, our destruction of life overseas. And you'll never see the mainstream media connect the two, as if they live in two separate worlds.
Exactly. Even the phony conversation around so-called gun violence is interesting to me, how that concern about a legitimate concern about gun violence, the moral positions people take when we have these senseless mass shootings, and look at this issue of violence in the U.S., how that issue then is disconnected from the normalization of violence and the support of U.S. military aggression globally. It's like the question becomes, what is it? What kind of tools are the U.S. forces using outside the borders of the U.S.? Sticks and stones? No, they have weapons. They have guns. So if you're concerned about gun violence, then that concern to be morally consistent has to be extended to your concern with U.S. aggression, U.S. warmongering. So we have to make all of these connections, Lee, because we're at a point in history where we don't have the luxury of illusions, especially for those of us who are at the receiving end of this colonial capitalist project. So we have to call it as we see it. We have to appeal to our allies to trust our analysis and to re-examine their own positions, their own worldviews, especially when it comes to things like U.S. patriotism. That basically, when you start embracing U.S. patriotism and defending the U.S., that in essence you are in some ways putting yourself in opposition to us, because we can't have any illusions about the nature of this state. And so we see that left and liberal patriotism is nothing but the flip side of the same white supremacist coin that you see from the other side. So these issues have to be connected. People have to understand them in order to make the correct decisions in terms of where they stand. Who will they align with? When would they put themselves on the line for social justice and human rights?
Yeah, very, very, very well said. In terms of our military and foreign policy, we now have, I talked about this some with Brian Becker yesterday, but we now have proof that, believe it or not, a horrible white supremacist like Donald Trump had tried to bring the troops out of Afghanistan, actually drafted a memo saying all troops would leave when he lost the election. He drafted that memo, and the military, the Pentagon, talked him out of it. And they had this May and then they had this May date for withdrawal, and now Biden has come forward and said, "Oh, the troops will come home in September," and yet I assume we'll continue to drone bomb. So, does this mean anything to you?
Well, one thing it does mean is I knew this was going to happen when I came on this show. So you pushing that Russian line, anytime, when you point to the fact that perhaps Donald Trump did something that may have some kind of value, then basically you are a pudding poodle or whatever. Look, it is absolutely incredible.
I wasn't saying he has any value as a human being.
It's absolutely incredible that we can allow the Biden administration to get away with the possibility of undermining what could be an end to the Afghan quagmire. The fact of the matter is, as you said in your question, that there was a process, as flawed as it may be, who knows, but it had the possibility of extracting the U.S. from its second longest war. We say second longest because we say that the longest war that was waged by the U.S. state was the more than 100 and something years war they waged against the indigenous people as they marched from the East Coast to the West Coast. Okay. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And one could even throw in the fact that the Korean War has never ended. So, this is what we have to deal with in terms of people understanding what it is we up against, and why we have to have clarity, like the name of this show. That if the Biden administration did not renegotiate with the Taliban an extension for U.S. forces to be in the country past May 1st, then what are they in fact doing? Are they setting up a scenario where the Taliban then begins to retarget U.S. troops, and then the Biden folks are now reluctantly having to escalate and bring U.S. forces back into the country, or not leave the country in the first place? We're not going to fall for it. So that's why at the Black Alliance of Peace, we issued a number of comments, including today, where we said that we want the U.S. out today. We want the U.S. out by May 1st. That unless there's an agreement with the Taliban, then this is a setup. This is something that is providing a pretext for the U.S. not to leave. And we know that there are powerful forces in the Biden administration, powerful forces in the foreign policy community that they don't want to see the U.S. leave, not because they're concerned about women's rights in Afghanistan. They're concerned about a blocking effort to the Chinese. They want to be in China and compete in Afghanistan and compete with the Chinese over that estimated $1 trillion worth of minerals in Afghanistan. They want to be able to block the Belt and Road Initiative. So there's a strong strategic, geostrategic argument that they take for why it's imperative for the U.S. to stay in Afghanistan. And that's why they're trying, we believe, to create the pretext, in fact, to do that.
And moving on to Latin America, do you see any difference so far in Biden's foreign policy towards Latin America and Trump's? Or is this just a continued U.S. empire acting like we own Latin America?
Well, again, when you make these comparisons, and then you say things like there's no difference between the Trump administration and the Biden administration when it comes to U.S. foreign policy objectives, you still get accused of being soft on whoever the current enemy is. And then when you go further and say that, in fact, in some ways, there's some issues that are more dangerous now as a consequence of the U.S. being in power, you really are running the risk of being condemned by these forces out there in cyber land. In Latin America, no. We see, like, for example, in Colombia, the Trump administration was trying to put pressure on the government here to do things like reinitiate aerial spraying of cocoa plants. Something that
glyphosate, right?
Yes, something that is clear is poison. It had impact on Afro-Colombian and indigenous peoples in terms of their ability to grow food. and it was resisted for many years. The Trump administration tried to put pressure on them. Even the government kind of slowed down. What's the position of the Biden administration? To make the same demands. So there's nothing. I mean, they are moving ahead to expand NATO. They are still actively undermining Venezuela and Nicaragua. They have their hands in the situation in Ecuador. They're still trying to undermine the situation in Bolivia. They're using the Organization of American States to undermine democracy by supporting Jovenel Moise in Haiti. So we raise the question, where is the difference? And there's no difference because objectively these forces are representing some of the same elements. In fact, we'll argue that the Biden administration, representing finance, capital, and the transnational corporations, are even more dangerous because they see that the military option is one of the best options they feel that they have in order to try to maintain and extend U.S. global dominance. So no changes here in Latin America. In fact, is even more dangerous because the oppositional forces in places like the U.S. allow themselves to be disarmed because they think they have a friendly face in the White House.
All great points. I try not to be one of these who makes everything about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I don't. I rarely do segments on her, even though she seems to be the media's main focus of anything of the Democrats. But she did the other day do an interview that people are talking about where she said, if you claim that Biden is the same as Trump, then you're essentially, in terms of border policy, immigration policy, then you're essentially saying that the people that Biden is saving at the border are not human beings. And she basically accused those who say Biden and Trump are the same of ignoring people of color at the border and acting like they're not human beings. I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Well, this is part of the kind of liberal refrain to attempt to try to use the weapon of ethnicity and race in order to provide cover to the policies of the neoliberal element that's in power right now. And what it does, it undermines the morality of these forces because they're not being consistent. To be consistent means you have to call things as you see them, as you know they really are. And so the policies we see that have generated the massive migration of peoples from Central America into or attempted to try to come into the U.S. is a consequence of U.S. policies over decades. And that's been a bipartisan set of policies over decades, including the Obama administration that created the situation in Honduras when they gave a green light to a coup in that country. So, you have to call things the way they are. If you're going to be biased on the side of the people. Okay, it's easy to find a way to collaborate with power. Okay, if you have real courage, then stand up for principles. Okay, so no, we're not going to fall for it. We're not going to allow our friends to be silenced by this kind of left opportunism. You call it the way it is. We got pig policies on the southern border being perpetrated by a Biden criminal cabal, a criminal regime, and it's got to be called out for what it really is. So later for AOC and all of the opportunists who are collaborating with these criminals.
I see the way that corporate America has captured the government. I mean, maybe it's been like that since day one. Basically, business owns our government, but and captured so much of the system that I don't see a lot of change coming in electoralism. Even though I tell everyone they should vote because it's like picking up litter. It's something you should do to be a good member of society, but it doesn't seem to be creating a lot of change in recent years. And I know that you ran as vice president on the Green Party ticket, and you ran an excellent campaign. But I want to hear your view on how much electoralism matters, and where people should be trying to create change, if not there.
Well, look, I mean, it's an objective fact that we have millions of people who participate in bourgeois electoral politics. The question for progressives and for people who want to see radical change in this country is to determine how we should relate to that area of struggle. We say that if you're going to participate in this process, it has to be from an organized base. You have to be clear about what it is you're trying to do. We think that there's still some possibilities on the local, we say we, meaning those of us who will look at this thing very closely. I'm not talking on behalf of BAP at this moment. But we think that there's some spaces that could be captured on the local level if you do it as part of a broader strategy for building alternative political power. The issue here, the principle that has to be raised is building independent political power. It means you're not collaborating with the Democrats. It means that you have a strategy that has the end result to strengthen your organizational base in order to build the structures, the instruments that we need in order to eventually have enough power to, in fact, take power. Okay, so we say you contest the opposition in every space. So we don't dismiss the electoral arena, but we also have no illusions about its possibilities. You're not going to vote yourself into liberation. The capitalists are not going to, because you're voting for them, even when you vote them out to a certain extent, they're not just going to give up power and walk away. So people have to understand that in the end, it's going to take a horrific struggle because you have the most entrenched, rapacious, backward ruling class in the history of humankind in these United States of America. And they ain't gonna give up nothing, okay? So if you're not ready for a life and death struggle, then you go off and play some golf and do some other stuff, because the struggle ain't where you need to be.
You can't vote yourself into liberation. I think that's the quote of the day. I wanted to, maybe on a positive note, during this pandemic, as so many people are struggling, in a way maybe even greater than we've seen in recent years. I have seen an increase in mutual aid, in mutualism, in cooperation. And I don't know if maybe that's the bubbles I'm operating in, or that's larger. But do you feel in these dark times, kind of coming out of this pandemic, that it could be a springboard to a bit of an awakening for humanity?
Oh, I'm optimistic. I'm seeing the same things you're saying. I'm seeing that people are experimenting with these mutual aid efforts in their local communities. I'm seeing these young people who are forced out of circumstances to raise critical questions with themselves and with their society. And they are radicalizing and looking for radical homes. The Black Alliance of Peace, for example, we are experiencing a tremendous expansion of our membership base of young Black radicals who understand what the game is and understand that the only way we're going to be able to advance ourselves and humanity is through radical organization. So no, there's a lot of good things. It's difficult and it's tough, but people had some training last year when they was getting their asses kicked and knocked upside the head by the police. That was a training process. And out of that experiences, we have a core of skilled activists who are thinking and who are struggling, who have been able to experience what it means to exercise some power. So we have to move, and we're moving that power of mobilization to organization. And many people understand that trajectory. And so, no, I'm absolutely optimistic. I think, though, it's key for us to build a radical movement in this country, not only to address our needs, but understanding the critical need to have change in order to relieve collective humanity. Because right now, the main contradiction in this world is between the U.S. and European bourgeoisie and collective humanity. And folks have to ask the question, what side are you going to be on? And so many people are making that decision, and they have decided to join with humanity, people of all backgrounds. And so that's why the state and the enemy is scared to death. That's why they want to split us up. That's why you have the myth of the bad protester and the good protester and the white folks who were like, working with the police and all that. They were scared to death at the multinational and multiracial character of what emerged last year. So we understand the okie doke. And so, no, we are very happy with the possibilities. We know it's going to be rough and tough. It's going to get worse before it gets better. But you cannot put a brake on the fight for social justice. And that's the thing that the enemy doesn't understand yet.
Well, thank you so much, Ajamu. I couldn't agree more, and you put it so beautifully. It's like poetry. So thank you for taking the time. I'm
glad to be here. Let's not go too long for the next time, Lee.
Absolutely, and for everybody that I'm sure wants to keep up with you or to join the struggle you were just talking about, Black Alliance for Peace has a website, correct?
.com, yes, blackallianceforpeace.com, and I got to remind myself to do this. Follow me on Twitter at Ajamu Baraka.
Absolutely. Thanks again.
Thank you.
All right. That was the always incredible Ajamu Baraka. Love his stuff. Love his voice. He sums it all up well. And he's been at the fight for a long time. So I do have another. I'm not going to wrap up yet. I do have another story for you I wanted to get to because why not? That's why. Because why not? Thanks again, all of you, for joining me, for being here. Like I said, all of the donations go to those in need. We talk more about that on the Sunday live stream with Eleanor Goldfield. That is usually Sundays at 7 or 8 p.m. I email everybody beforehand to let you know what time, and you can join that email by texting the word redacted to 33777. That's how you can join the email list. So the story I want to hit on before I wrap up here is, I'm sure many of you remember and this, by the way, this goes along the ongoing thread of how Russiagate collapses and all the anti-Russia. Russia's attacking us. Russia owns Donald Trump. Russia owns Bernie Sanders. Russia owns Jill Stein. Russia owns anybody who doesn't run around with a Hillary T-shirt on, et cetera, et cetera. This goes along that line that all of those stories ultimately collapse. I mean, if you really keep up with them, if you keep up with the nitty gritty, with the day to day, they all, when the truth comes out, collapse. And our mainstream media basically doesn't report when they collapse, or they'll report one article, whereas they spent 5 days straight, 24/7, talking about the initial allegations. Then when it collapses, one article should suffice to tell you that they were completely wrong and they've got their head up their ass. So this one goes in that thread, goes in that genre of let's watch all of this garbage collapse. This was the story, you might recall, from a few months back, that it came out, and this was right at the time that Donald Trump said he was going to withdraw troops from Germany, 10,000 troops from Germany, and he was going to withdraw troops from Afghanistan. So he says that, and a day or 2 days later, big major story, right? All the networks. It comes out, Russia is paying Taliban bounties to kill American soldiers. Now, I have spent time debunking this before, but there's an update. And the mainstream media went fucking crazy, right? Head on fire. Rachel Maddow was literally showing photos of soldiers who she claimed Russia had paid to have killed, U.S. soldiers that Russia had paid the Taliban to have killed, literally putting up photos on the screen. Here are the people they're killing. Now, where she got those, and she just made them up in her head, I guess. But anyway, at the time, those of us, and maybe Aaron Monte did some of the best stuff on this, but those of us who knew to not just take anonymous deep state sources on this crap said, well, what's the evidence? Where's the proof? And no one could point to any proof other than, somebody at the CIA said so. That was the entirety of it. So the story started getting picked apart. And now we're several months removed from it, right? Well, here, I'm going to show you, is an article from, I believe, today or yesterday. I think it's today. U.S. intel walks back, claims Russians put bounties on American troops. So it has now backed to the point of basically not being anything. And in the headline here, this is from Daily Beast, which, is a largely garbage outlet, but this is a true story. And by the way, Daily Beast gives into Russiagate, believes Russiagate, all that shit. But in this case, they're reporting because they had to, what Biden said. And, the subtitle says Donald Trump might have been right to call it a hoax. And within the article, it's pretty fucking hilarious. I mean, how pathetically they fell for this garbage story. But they start off saying it was a blockbuster story about Russia's return to the imperial great game in Afghanistan. The Kremlin had spread money around to the long-time battlefield to kill U.S. forces. But on Thursday, the Biden administration announced that U.S. intelligence only had low to moderate confidence in the story after all. Translated from the jargon of spy world, that means the intelligence agencies have found that the story is, at best, unproven and possibly untrue. And I think Daily Beast is being a bit gentle there. That means untrue, okay? At best, unproven, but likely untrue. And this is so, I think what makes this new is that this is even the Biden administration and the Daily Beast, standard liberal outlet, pro mainstream neoliberal garbage, anti-Russia at every turn. Even those outlets are saying, we think this has been debunked. So here's a quote. The U.S. intelligence community assesses with low to moderate confidence that Russian intelligence officers sought to encourage Taliban attacks U.S. and coalition personnel in Afghanistan in 2019 and perhaps earlier. This information puts a burden, and I love, this is maybe the best line of the whole thing. This is continuing to quote the Biden official. This information puts a burden on the Russian government to explain its actions and take steps to address this disturbing pattern of behavior. You just said there was no pattern of behavior. Like, literally, you just said that this garbage story about Russia was false. And yet then the Biden official says, so explain yourself. Russia. This would be like if you accuse someone of stabbing you, you're like, you totally stabbed me. And your friend's like, no, I really didn't. And you're like, you totally stabbed me. No, I really didn't. And then you realize you haven't even been stabbed. And you go, okay, I have relatively low confidence in the idea that you stabbed me because I haven't been stabbed. But now explain your pattern of behavior. What? You just said there was no pattern of behavior. I mean, this is how backwards and upside down it really is. If for anyone who read the novel Catch-22, it really is Catch-22. This is just backward, upside down world where a Biden official or a U.S. government official can come out and say, hey, we basically totally made up that bullshit we used to make sure Trump wouldn't withdraw troops. And now we would like for Russia to explain themselves. We totally made up that thing about Russia. Now, Russia, you explain yourself. It is such a backwards, upside down world of their propaganda. It's unbelievable. Like, even for those of us who are skeptical, it's unbelievable. To read a little of the article, to go back to the article. And so the next sentence says, significantly, the Biden team announced a raft of sanctions on Thursday. So they're sanctioning the Russian government despite coming out and admitting this story was false. Holy fucking shit. It then says that the sanctions are also prompted by Russia's interference in the 2020 election. What interference in the 2020 election? Like, you haven't even put forward any fake interference claims like you did in the 2016 election. The 2016 election, you claimed that a Facebook ad that 4 people saw somehow rigged the election of Bernie Sanders in a banana hammock, like fucking that did it. At least you had that ridiculous claim. In 2020, you told us the elections are completely legit, nothing wrong with them, and yet you're still pretending Russia interfered? What in the flying fuck are you talking about? So they just put sanctions, more sanctions on Russia. And by the way, for anyone who thinks Trump was easy on Russia, there were actually far more sanctions on Russia under Trump than under Obama. And Trump also pulled out of a lot of weapons deals that Russia was a part of and wanted to be a part of, obviously, or they would have pulled out. Let's see. We have noted, so this is continuing to quote the official, senior administration official. We have noted our conclusion of the review that conducted on the bounties issue, and we have conveyed through diplomatic, intelligence, and military channels strong direct measures on this issue. But we are not specifically tying the actions we are taking today to the matter. Oh, that's good to hear. You're not tying sanctions against Russia to a matter where you just said it didn't fucking happen. According to the officials, so the bounty story, they say the alleged bounty story came from detainee reporting. You think, meaning basically people that they were torturing, even if they're no longer doing the car battery strapped to your balls torturing, they're still doing the lock you in solitary confinement kind of torturing. So they've got other forms of torture that continue to do. So basically they're saying that a detainee was being tortured and told us shit just to basically stop the torture, which is all of the information that someone gives you when they're being tortured is generally either false or unreliable because they're being fucking tortured. It says that it probably came from detainee reporting, raising the specter that someone told the U.S.-aligned Afghan jailers. And by the way, these are Afghan jailers. So even if the U.S. claims to have stopped various kinds of torture, even though they continue the imprisonment torture, even if they've stopped certain kinds of torture, often they'll give prisoners to Afghan jailers who support, who work for the U.S. government. And how do you know they're not torturing them? They haven't agreed to the same things that the U.S. military might have. Now we, as Obama said in the past, we did torture some folks. Afghan jailers, what they thought was necessary to get out of the cage, meaning these detainees told their jailers whatever the fuck they could to get released. Specifically, the official cited information and evidence of connections to criminal agents in Afghanistan and elements of the Russian government as sources for the intelligence community's assessment. Without any additional cooperation, such reporting is notoriously unreliable. Yeah, you think? You fucking think? So there you have it. How many months after the Russia is paying bounties to have U.S. troops killed are they now admitting that basically it was 100% false? Not basically, it was 100% false. I mean, this is months later and you see some small reporting about it, because if they were to do some major reporting about it, if it were to be wall to wall 24/7 for 5 days like the bounty story was, then you would have to have all of those fucking anchors, Rachel Maddow and Brian Williams and fucking all of Fox News and every last one of these people, CNN, Anderson Cooper, Wolf Blitzer, would have to come on TV and go, hey, let's spend the hour talking about how we were fucking so wrong, so dumb, so naive, to say the least. I mean, of course, the truth is they're not naive. They don't care whether it's propaganda or not. Their job is to push the state narrative. So they don't give a fuck whether it turns out to be false 6 weeks later or not. Those of us with any goddamn sense in our heads knew it was false and fucking said, oh, really? This is coming from anonymous sources inside the CIA? Huh. Wonder what the odds are that they made up that shit to make sure troops weren't withdrawn. Anyway, if they really covered it, if they did a lot of coverage of it, then they'd have to sit there for an hour. Now, they might do one little pinprick coverage here or there. A headline will run across the bottom on a ticker. Hey, by the way, we were wrong for fucking past 4 months. But, of course, they won't do that. So this is the classic mainstream media. We gave you a garbage CIA talking point. We also pointed to others and said, you're fucking, anybody who doubted it, oh, you're a fucking Russian asset. You're a Russian agent because you doubt this story. You're anti-American. But yet, here we are. What do you know? Turns out to be false, as was fucking all of Russiagate. Yet again, you see it all collapse. I mean, honestly, it's like, how many times can they do this and people will believe it? How many times can our mainstream media go, hey, we told you that thing. Yeah, totally not true. And people will fall for it. Like how are we just going to do this forever and ever and ever? Or is there some point where people will go, yeah, it turns out they're just full of shit. This doesn't mean Trump's not full of shit and Biden's not full of shit. They are too. People need to learn all of these people are full of shit. Fucking figure it out. Thank you, Chris, for the donation. All donations are going to those in need. If you need a little help, email commoncensored@protonmail.com. I'm going to wrap this up. Thank you guys so much for joining me. I have a new Redacted Tonight coming out this week, a new Redacted VIP coming out this week with Monica Cruz from Breakthrough News. Oh, and tomorrow I will have on comedian Dave Anthony, who does some great left-wing comedy. He also hosts the podcast, The West Wing Thing, which is a pretty great and hilarious podcast where they basically play West Wing episodes. They don't play them on the podcast. They watch them off the podcast, and then they analyze how West Wing, the show, which maybe you guys watched. I watched them when I was like a teenager. How the show West Wing was just neoliberal garbage. I mean, as is most Aaron Sorkin stuff. Neoliberal fucking garbage. And they do a great job of breaking it down because I remember watching all those shows. Anyway, I'm going to be talking to Dave Anthony tomorrow on the live stream, so I hope you'll join me. He will be at 5 p.m. Tomorrow, Eastern, 5 p.m. Eastern. And after that, I will be filming Government Secrets on Graham Elwood's channel is where we do that live stream at 6 p.m. Eastern. So I hope you'll join me for all of that. The live stream with Eleanor Goldfield is Sunday. And, of course, check out all the podcasts. There's a new episode of Common Censored up, podcast Common Censored. Thanks a lot for joining me, and let's keep fighting.